Welcome back to Titan Academy. In this video, we will cover variables and how to use them in Titan Forms version 2.0. We will discuss what is a variable, the different types of variables that are available to you in a Titan Forms 2.0 project, and how to use variables to push data into Salesforce. A variable is an element in your Titan Forms that you can use to calculate or store data that can be available behind the scenes but should not be available or visible to the end user. I've set up a form here with some input for a first name, a last name, email, and then a couple of numeric fields. We are going to use this to create a contact, but first we will create some variables to hold other data that we need to use to create the record. To create a variable, click on the gear icon, go to Tools, and on Custom Variables, select the gear. There are a number of different types of variables that are available to you. First, you have a system variable. These are variables that are calculated by the Titan system. You have all kinds of options: language, browser, OS, IP address, current date, etc. Let's select the current IP address of the user. And I'll call this variable current IP. The Titan system will capture the IP address of the current user and store it in this variable. Note that system variables are read-only. You can put data from the system into them, but you cannot update these variables in the project. Next, we have static variables, which are exactly that. These variables can be used to hold data, and they are accessible throughout the project and can be updated or changed. In this example, I'll make a variable called account ID. And we will use this variable to store the Salesforce record ID of the account that we want to use to create the contact. So I'll go into Salesforce. Let's select ABC account. I will get the account ID. And we will paste it into here as this variable's default value. Now, when we later create the contact, rather than having to search Salesforce for this account ID, we have this variable available. I'll show you how to use it later. Next, we have environment variables. The first two types of variables that I've shown are variables that are available within the project. Environment variables, on the other hand, are available throughout your entire Titan environment and can be accessed by all of your other Titan projects. Let's go ahead and create an environment variable here. An example of a possible use case for environment variables is storing the ID of a Salesforce record type. In my sample Salesforce environment, I have record types enabled on the contact object. So I'll create a variable called partner ID, and then we'll go into Salesforce into setup. I'll go to the contact object and get the ID of that specific record type. Partner record type ID. I'll copy this out of the URL. I'll paste it in as a default value, and I'll make this variable public so the value can be viewed when using and debugging a project. We now have a variable partner ID that can be referenced by all Titan projects in this Titan environment. Those are environment variables. Next, let's look at numeric variables. Numeric variables are variables that hold calculations. I'll create one, and I'll call it total family members. When you configure the variable, you can add inputs from fields on your form. I put a couple of numeric fields on the form: how many children and how many siblings. So let's create a calculation of the total number of children plus the total number of siblings. This variable will then hold the value of that sum. If you want, you can map the outcome of this to another variable. You would do that in the map to field here. Next, we have string variables, which are similar to numeric variables, only they hold values of strings. I'll create one. We'll call this full name. We'll configure it, and we will use this to concatenate together the values put into the first name text on the form and the last name text box. Finally, we have JavaScript variables. We won't go into detail on this because it's too much detail for one video, but just know that this option is available to you. Let's click Apply and Save. Now let's take a look at how we would use those variables when interacting with Salesforce. We want to create a push to Salesforce to create a contact. I'll go ahead and click the gear, Salesforce, and create a push. Click Create New. Select for your object Contact. The action is Create. On the Mapping tab, let's map the fields and the variables from our form to fields in Salesforce. The ones that are on the form, last name, first name, and email, we will map to the appropriate Salesforce fields. First name, and type here if you want to search. Email, map the email field. Those are the inputs that are on our form. We're also going to map information from the variables. Remember that for the system variable, we captured the current user's IP address. I've created a custom field on the contact object in Salesforce called IP address details. We will map to that the current IP global variable that we created. That's the system variable. We also created a variable to store the account ID. So let's map to the Salesforce account ID field the value in the account ID variable. Finally, for the contact record type, we will store the value that is saved in the environment variable partner ID. Let's look at what we've mapped. So we have 3 fields from the inputs on the form and then 3 from variables. We'll apply this. Go ahead and click Close. In our Create Buttons action, open up the action window. We will want to add a Salesforce action node. We will call that Contact Create Push that we just created. Click Next, Apply, and Save. Before we take a look at how that works, let's turn on debug mode. So go to the gear, Tools. Debug mode is already turned on. If it's not turned on, go ahead and enable it. Let's go ahead and preview this form. Before we enter anything, let's look at the debug results. In the debug window, you can see the values of all of the inputs on your form, all of your variables, etc. We see the current IP is captured and stored there. The account ID is the account ID that we saved in that variable. Total family members is 0 because there is nothing entered in either of those 2 numeric fields. Full name is blank, again, because the form is blank. And the partner ID contains this static value. Let's go ahead and add some data on the form. First name John, last name Smith, last name, how many children, 2, how many siblings, 3. Now let's look at the debug again. And you can see that total family members is now 5, 2 plus 3, and the full name is first name, last name. Let's go ahead and push that into Salesforce. Click Create. That push will run. Now if I go back to the project, go to the Salesforce menu, Integration Logs, we can see that this push ran and it created a contact. Let's go ahead and have a look at that record in Salesforce. And you can see that we've created a new contact named John Smith associated with ABC account. The email's set accordingly. The IP address is saved. The contact record type is partner, and there you go. Finally, in your forms project, when you're using strips and columns, we'll cover this in more detail in another video, but just know your strips, which hold elements of the form, you could add multiple strips per page, you could have multiple columns per strip, and you can configure either the strip or the strip column to repeat. This is useful when you are dealing with an unknown number of records. Simply select the strip or the column and enable repeat. When repeat is enabled, another custom variables window opens. This looks very similar to the variable setup that we used at the project level, but these variables are only available within the context of the repeat column or the repeat strip. And that is how it's done.